The words were thrown at him like a dare, sharp and careless, carried on the dust-heavy air outside the Dry Gulch saloon. If you want to, just do it. They weren't shouted. That was the cruel part. They were spoken lightly, almost amused, by a man who had never lifted a fence post or broken ground with his own hands. Laughter followed, thin and nervous, from a few men standing nearby, the kind of laughter that tried to align itself with power before power noticed them. Ethan Cole stood a few paces away, his boots planted in the dirt street as if roots had grown from their soles. He didn't turn his head toward the speaker right away. He didn't clench his fists or spit back a reply. He simply breathed, slow and measured, as though the entire town had gone quiet inside his chest. The banker, Harlan Wick, leaned against a hitching post, gold watch chain glinting in the sun. His vest was too clean for a place like Dry Gulch, his hands too soft. He gestured lazily with his thumb toward the low hills north of town, where new fence posts marched across the land in a straight, arrogant line. That land's spoken for now, Wick continued, as if explaining a simple fact to a slow child. Papers are signed, stakes are driven, best thing you can do is forget it ever belonged to you. Ethan finally turned. His face was weathered, carved by sun and wind, his eyes dark and steady beneath the brim of his hat. He looked past Wick, past the saloon doors swinging open and shut, past the cluster of men pretending not to stare. His gaze fixed instead on the hills, where the fence cut through the grass like a scar. That land wasn't just dirt to him. It was his father's hands blistered and bleeding as he cleared stones. His mother hanging laundry that snapped white in the wind. It was the place where he'd learned to ride before he could read, where his father had collapsed one evening and never stood again. They buried him there, beneath an oak that bent west with the prevailing wind. Wick didn't know any of that. He didn't care. Town's changing, Cole, Wick said. Railroads coming through. Progress doesn't wait for sentiment. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Silence stretched, uncomfortable now, and the laughter died away. Wick straightened, irritation flashing across his face. Well, the banker prodded. You got something to say. Ethan looked at him then, really looked at him, and for a brief moment Wick seemed to shrink under the weight of that stare. But Ethan didn't give him the satisfaction of words. He turned instead and walked away, boots crunching softly against the dirt. Behind him, someone scoffed. That's right, a voice called. Walk away. Ethan didn't stop. He crossed the street, past the general store where Mrs. Hale stood in the doorway pretending to arrange jars she'd already straightened twice. Their eyes met, and she gave him a look heavy with unspoken sympathy. Her farm had gone the same way, swallowed up by papers and promises she never understood until it was too late. Ethan swung up onto his horse at the edge of town. The animal shifted beneath him, sensing the tension coiled tight in its rider. He took the reins, glanced once more toward the hills, and nudged the horse forward. The ride out was quiet. Too quiet. Even the cicadas seemed to hold back their song. As Ethan climbed higher, the sounds of town faded until there was only wind and the rhythmic thud of hooves against dry earth. The fence came into view just before sunset. Fresh timber, pale and raw, driven deep into the ground. Barbed wire stretched tight between posts, cruel little hooks glinting like teeth. It cut straight through the pasture where Ethan used to run cattle, sliced across the creek his father had dug out by hand to keep water flowing in. Dry months. He reined in his horse and sat there for a long moment. The sun dipped low, setting the wire aflame with orange light. For a heartbeat, doubt flickered. Not fear, never fear, but the weight of consequence. He knew what crossing this line would mean. Wick would howl, the sheriff would come, the town would choose sides, and none of them would be gentle. Ethan reached down and grabbed the coil of rope tied to his saddle. If you want to, just do it. The words echoed again, but now they didn't sound mocking. They sounded like permission. He dismounted, looped the rope around the first fence post, and tied it fast. The knot was clean and sure, the same one his father had taught him when he was barely tall enough to reach a saddle horn. Ethan mounted again, took the other end of the rope, and nudged his horse forward. The post resisted at first, groaning softly, as if surprised by the challenge. Then the earth gave way with a crack, dirt spraying as the post tore free. The wire screamed, a high, metallic wail that split the evening air. Ethan didn't stop. He rode parallel to the fence line, dragging post after post free, the wire snapping and tangling, biting into the ground. His arms burned. Dust filled his mouth and eyes. Splinters flew, stinging his skin, but he leaned into it, teeth clenched, heart pounding with something that felt dangerously close to relief. Smoke rose where wire scraped against dry grass, the smell sharp and acrid. From the ridge, the destruction must have been visible for miles. And in town, people would be looking up now, pointing, murmuring, realizing exactly what Ethan Cole had decided to do. By the time the sun disappeared, half the fence lay in ruins, twisted and broken like a fallen snake. Ethan slowed, breathing hard, chest heaving. He stopped his horse and surveyed the damage. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't clean, but it was done. He turned back toward town under a sky streaked purple and red. As he rode, lanterns flickered to life in Dry Gulch, one by one, like wary eyes opening in the dark. Voices rose, distant at first, then louder, angrier. When Ethan entered the street, conversations stopped. Men spilled out of the saloon. Women gathered in doorways. Someone swore under their breath. Someone else shouted his name like an accusation. The sheriff pushed through the crowd, hand hovering near his holster. "Ethan," he said, trying for calm. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Ethan swung down from his saddle slowly. Dust coated his boots, his trousers, his hands. He looked like a man who had wrestled the land itself and come back marked by it. "You had no right," a man yelled from the crowd. "That fence was legal," another shouted. Ethan lifted his head, eyes scanning the faces around him. He saw anger, yes, but he also saw fear. Fear of rocking boats that had already started taking on water. "That land was taken before it was bought," Ethan said at last. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut clean through the noise. "I just took it back." The words hung there, heavy as thunder. No one spoke for a long moment. Even the saloon doors stilled. Harlan Wick stepped forward, face pale beneath his anger. "You think you can just tear down what doesn't belong to you?" he demanded. "You think this ends well for you?" Ethan met his gaze, unblinking. "I think it already ended the day you decided paper mattered more than people." The town didn't erupt then. It didn't cheer or riot. It simply held its breath, caught between what had always been and what might come next. And in that silence, everyone understood the same thing. Nothing in Dry Gulch was going to be simple ever again. Morning broke over Dry Gulch like a reluctant witness. The sun climbed slow and pale, casting long shadows that made the town look stretched and uneasy, as if it hadn't quite settled back into its own skin after the night before. Smoke still lingered faintly in the air from cook fires and scorched grass on the ridge, carrying with it the memory of snapping wire and splintered posts. Word had spread before dawn. By the time Ethan Cole rode back into town, men were already gathered near the well, hats pulled low, voices hushed but sharp. Women stood on porches with folded arms, eyes tracking every movement. Even the horses sensed it, stamping and snorting, uneasy under their riders. Ethan dismounted near the hitching rail and tied his horse with deliberate calm. He hadn't slept. There were dark circles beneath his eyes, but his back was straight, his movements steady. He knew what waited for him. He had known since the moment the first fence post came free. The sheriff stood in the middle of the street, boots planted wide, badge catching the light. He looked older than he had the day before, like the night had added years to his shoulders. When he saw Ethan, he lifted a hand, not in greeting but in warning. "Before this goes any further," the sheriff said, voice tight, "we're going to talk." Ethan nodded once. "That's fair." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Fair was a word that hadn't meant much in Dry Gulch for a long time. Harlan Wick pushed forward then, dressed sharp despite the dust, his expression fixed somewhere between fury and disbelief. Two men flanked him, hired muscle with stiff postures and eyes that kept drifting to their guns. "You call this fair?" Wick snapped. "He destroyed private property. He incited chaos. This town runs on law, not on tantrums." Ethan turned to face him. "This town runs on people," he said. "Or it used to." Wick laughed, sharp and humorless. "You think tearing down a fence makes you righteous? All you've done is turn the town against you." Ethan looked around slowly. Faces stared back at him. Some hard, some conflicted, some quietly curious. He recognized almost all of them. Men he'd shared coffee with. Women who'd once trusted him to fix a broken gate or drive cattle through a storm. I didn't do it to be liked, Ethan said. I did it because it needed doing. A man near the back scoffed. And who decides that? You. Ethan's gaze settled on him. No, but I know when something's wrong. The sheriff lifted his hands. Enough. We're not turning this into a shouting match. He took a breath and looked at Ethan. You crossed a line last night. Legal or not, that fence was registered. There are consequences for that. I know, Ethan said quietly. The sheriff hesitated. Then why did it? For a moment, Ethan said nothing. He glanced toward the north, where the hills rose gentle and familiar, even from here. Because if I didn't, he said, I'd be telling every man and woman here that it's fine to lose what you worked for as long as someone else signs the right paper. Silence followed, thick and heavy. Mrs. Hale stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. She was small, bent slightly with age, but her voice carried. That fence crossed my creek too, she said. Blocked the water I've depended on since my husband was alive. Heads turned. Wick's jaw tightened. A younger rancher spoke next, hesitant but firm. It cut through my grazing land. I was told to take it up with the bank. Another voice joined in. Same here. The murmurs grew louder, no longer just whispers. The crowd shifted, not forward exactly, but closer together, like pieces finding their place in a larger picture. Wick raised his voice. This is exactly what I mean, he said. Mob thinking. Progress requires sacrifice. You all signed contracts. You all agreed to terms. Some of us couldn't read them, Mrs. Hale shot back, and some of us trusted you. The sheriff closed his eyes briefly, then removed his hat. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. This town's been angry a long time, he said. Angry and quiet. That's a dangerous mix. He looked at Ethan. What you did last night lit a match. Whether that burns us or warms us depends on what happens next. Wick scoffed. You're going to side with him. I'm going to side with the truth, the sheriff replied. And the truth is, those fences went up fast. Too fast. And they crossed lines that shouldn't have been crossed. Wick's face flushed. This is outrageous. Ethan stepped forward then, not aggressively, but with purpose. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he said to the crowd. I'm not asking you to follow me. I'm saying that if we don't speak up now, we won't recognize this place in a year. A gust of wind swept through the street, kicking up dust that danced in the sunlight. It rattled loose shutters and sent a shiver through the gathering. No one cheered. No one drew a gun. But something shifted all the same. The sheriff cleared his throat. We'll investigate the claims. Survey the land properly. Until then, no more fences go up. No more come down. Wick stared at him. You can't be serious. I am, the sheriff said. And if you don't like it, you can take it up with the county. For the first time, Wick looked uncertain. The crowd began to disperse slowly, people peeling away in small groups, talking in low voices. The tension didn't vanish, but it loosened, like a knot that had finally been pulled just enough to breathe. Ethan stood where he was, watching them go. He felt no triumph, no relief, only a steady awareness of what he'd set in motion. Some would thank him, others would never forgive him. Both were fine. The sheriff approached him last. You made my job harder, he said. Ethan nodded. I figured. The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then sighed. You also reminded folks they have a voice. That counts for something. Ethan swung back into his saddle as the sun climbed higher. He tipped his hat once, not in farewell, but in acknowledgement, and turned his horse toward the hills. Behind him, Dry Gulch buzzed with uneasy life, louder and more divided than it had been in years. Ahead of him, the land stretched open, scarred but still his in ways no paper could ever measure. He rode on, knowing one simple truth. He had done it, and whether the town ever forgave him or not, it would never again pretend nothing was wrong.